Welcome to another episode of Horns of a Dilemma, the podcast of the Texas National Security Review, which is a partnership between War on the Rocks and the University of Texas at Austin. My name is Ryan Evans. I serve, among many other things, as the publisher of the Texas National Security Review, which you can find at tnsr.org. In this episode, Beth Sanner delivers a candid and enriching lecture about being an intelligence professional at the highest level in the White House. She was the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Mission Integration from April 2019 to March 2021. This involved a lot of different duties, but one of them is serving as President Donald Trump's intelligence briefer. She doesn't reveal any secrets, of course, but this is really the most honest and revealing talk I've ever heard about the intelligence business. It's a must listen for anyone considering a career in this field.
I'm really delighted to be here. I do like to come to campuses and talk to people. I feel like it's not just about the next generation, but it's also about having the American people understand a little bit more about the intelligence community. You know, trying to be a little bit more transparent and explaining things. So I welcome your questions. I may not answer all of them. So I wanted to do two things today. One, I want to talk about what the President's Daily Brief is and, briefing the president, what that's all about. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the lessons learned. And that's mainly for, I think, students, perhaps, in thinking about what I think are the important lessons. And it doesn't just apply to briefing the president, but it applies, I think, in life. Because so much of what we do in our professional lives, it really all starts here. It starts at the beginning of your careers and how you begin to think about your role and how you interact with people. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start off with, as President Trump's briefer, so I was at the pointy end of the spear, as they say, but I also, throughout my entire career was involved in producing what's called the President's Daily Brief. So it's not just produced by the CIA, it's produced by the intelligence community. Although increasingly it is produced now by the CIA because the people in charge of it. But when I was there, we had the nirvana of ICU participation because I thought it was very important. But it is the classified newspaper, basically, of the intelligence community. So it is the all those secrets and knowledge put together into insightful articles. And it has existed for quite a long time. I spent the day yesterday at the library, at the LBJ library, and if you all haven't spent time there, you need to go back and, you should spend some time there. It is a wonderful place. And you all are, I think, so blessed to be at a place where so much of what our country is about, came out of LBJ. And the PDB for the intelligence community is one of those things. It's the closest thing to what exists today. It started with LBJ. So the president's checklist was actually begun under Kennedy. And it was only given to Kennedy for a few months, and then he expanded it to a few people, SecDef and SecState, but not to Vice President Johnson. Vice President Johnson discovered that CIA was providing this secret newspaper, basically, to the President of the United States on the day he walked into the Oval Office the day after the assassination. Surprise! And then Johnson, for a while, took this briefing. He took a briefing from the head of CIA, but then he was so busy. I mean, you think about when you go through the library, you realize how much foreign policy was going on, stuff I had forgotten about, as well as the Great Society. I mean, there was a lot going on, and he got to be a little bit busy. And so the CIA folks realized they had lost their customer. So here they were producing this book for this classified newspaper, and it was going to lots of people at that point, but the president wasn't reading it. I don't know if you followed Trump at all, but that's kind of a little flash of history to my personal experience. Lots of people were getting this daily publication, but the president wasn't reading it. What do? So the CIA folks figured out what's his daily life? How are we going to figure this out? How do we make sure that the president knows what's going on? And they realized that he did all of his reading at night. He would get this big binder or whatever at night. And so they produced something shorter, 2 pages. Each thing, they had 3 things per page, 3 items per page. That was it. and it went into his nightly reading, and he fell in love with it. And the rest is history. But it's an example that each president handles things differently. Kennedy got briefings all the time, and he got, he had his own checklist thing, and it was developed for him. It was very idiosyncratic to his needs. And then they figured out what Johnson needed. And when I came in as President Trump's briefer, I was lucky that there had been someone who was a good friend of mine briefing Trump for the first 2 years. So I came in the last 2 years. And so, Ted had figured out a lot of how to do this. And one of the things he figured out was to write an outline. And this outline, literally just an outline. And he gave that to the president. And he figured this out like this last couple weeks. And he said, Beth, I don't know why in the world I did not figure this out sooner. But this outline was this wonderful thing, something to think about as you do your presentations when you talk to a boss or whatever. It gave, the president exactly what we were going to talk about. When I came in, I was head of the PDB before that, and I had made up for Ted this beautiful paper, like this really heavy paper, and I made a special golden eagle on the top, and I had this paper, and Ted didn't want to do that. He just wanted something casual. And I was like, why are you doing that? So my first day, I came in with an outline on this lovely paper with this beautiful gold eagle. And he loved that. He just loved that. And it was just a special thing. Like, it was like me saying to him, you're important to me. I'm giving you this. You're the President of the United States. Gold eagle for you. Anyway, it was just a special thing. But each president has their thing. What I did, I really emphasized graphics and visuals. And I know people have made fun of that, and it kind of pisses me off. I'm sorry, but I don't know when a picture, wasn't worth 1,000 words. All of a sudden, when somebody you don't like gets that, you think it's funny and you make fun of it. That's not true. That's just silliness. Graphs, maps. Who doesn't love a good map, for goodness sake? You know what's going on if you got a good map, or you create something sophisticated, or you show a picture that really explains who a person is, or you make a video of a leader and someone can really visualize that leader and understand who they are and what they're about. And that gives somebody a decision advantage when they walk in the room. You know where that person came from. These things, all matter. And so I really focused on using things that were sophisticated things or sometimes very simple things as a way of supplementing what was an 100% oral briefing. So, for me, it was twice a week, minimum of a half an hour each time, sometimes ran over an hour. Pros and cons of that were that, I had to condense a daily publication into twice a week. But the beauty of that was I got to condense all of these different things into stories. And when you think about how, who are good communicators? Storytellers, people who can put together a story and explain to you why things matter and how things tie together and how things relate to each other, right? That's the beauty of communication. It's not someone reading something to you and then jumping to the next thing and it has no relationship to the previous thing and then the next thing. That's boring, and it's not actually how the world works. And I think the connectivity of our world today is such that making those connections for someone and helping them understand how one thing can affect another or is affecting another is just a great thing. And so, I thought of myself as not like a child storyteller, but as a storyteller. You can now get a degree in that. We kind of assume this thing is important. But now that we have open source intelligence, just proliferating like crazy, we have all of these think tanks writing wonderful pieces. You all read them all the time. You might wonder why the PDB is important. What in the intelligence community does is called all source intelligence, right? It takes open source, but it layers all of the secret information on top of it. But it also takes this information from all these different agencies. One of the great things about the PDB is it really is the voice of the intelligence community, the entire intelligence community. It has to be coordinated by all of the intelligence community, but it also includes information from all parts of the intelligence community, and it includes the wisdom and the insight from experts. Now, look at a topic like North Korea. No one agency can do analysis on North Korea. It's just too complex now. You need those analysts who do, overhead analysis down at NGA, National Geospatial, to really understand, what is happening at this facility? What are they watching? How to make sense of that? And you need the experts who have linguistic capabilities, maybe at NSA. You need people who are engineers. You need people who understand how the nuclear fuel cycle works. You need geologists, seismologists. You need all sorts of people, and they are all over the intelligence community. You need economists. You need psychologists, right? So it takes a village, I think, to do great analysis. And one of the things that the intelligence community can do, unlike any other place in the world, is that we can almost instantaneously pull together people with all of those different backgrounds and skills together, and we do it all the time. We have communities of interest, communities of practice, where we're pulling people together from all across. Mainly in the academic community, you don't have that. It is very hard to make those connections outside of your field. That's what we do. So we take this information, we layer it, we take our insight and our expertise, the deep expertise, and we put that together. So a lot of this has to do with what it is, right? It's the material that we present, but it's also because we're having a conversation. So when an intelligence briefer is in the room with a principal, you're actually finding out information from them that's informing what you're writing the next day or the next week. So this is something that people on the outside never can do. You don't know what the tempo is, what the schedule is, what the next meeting is going to be on in depth. You don't know the questions that are being asked. I mean, you can surmise big picture, but you don't really know what that agenda is for the principals committee meeting. Or when is this person going on a trip 2 weeks in advance? Who are they meeting with? What do they need to know? And it is that inside information that truly informs this conversation. I think the other thing that's really important is level setting. So the PDB isn't just read by the president. It is read by the entire national security team. And I'll explain in a minute how that all works. But that means that everybody is reading the same baseline of analysis. There's an agreed upon understanding of what's important and what the intelligence community thinks. And I can't tell you how many times a briefer would come back and say, General Mattis was asking whether Sec State read that piece. And they would go into the briefer for Sec State, did, so-and-so read that piece? Yes or no? If not, make sure that you tell him that I read it and I want to have a conversation about that. There's this enormous amount of conversation that's going on outside of what most people realize with this baseline information that the intelligence community is providing. Almost every policy meeting I ever went to started with a briefing from the intelligence representative to provide that what's going on right now? What do we know? What do we analyze? What do we think? And then the conversation starts from there. And oftentimes in the package that's given out before those meetings or during those meetings, it contains a PDB or another intelligence community piece that level sets that conversation. There is no other intelligence organization in the world where that happens. Nowhere else. When it comes to the intelligence community and what our RIT is, which is to provide objective, unbiased information that has no policy goal. I'm butchering the IC language here, but it's from the statute. There are very few intelligence communities in the world that also have that RIT of providing that objective analysis that doesn't have a policy angle to it. And that's why CIA remains very central, because a number of the other agencies still have that agency to leadership link that makes them not quite as all sources and objective. But I think it's still across the board. And when you get the intelligence community getting together and agreeing on lines, that really helps. So to me, all of that is really important. But the most important thing about the PDB is it is the embodiment of the relationship, of the personal relationship between the intelligence community and the policymaker. And that embodiment of that is every briefer for the PDB who goes into a senior policymaker and sits across a table from them and briefs them and answers questions for them. It is that personal relationship between that senior policymaker and the intelligence community. And the PDB is the way that that happens. And when you think about the intelligence community and what it's based on integrity. That what we're doing is to provide this service of unbiased analysis, unfettered by policy prescription, and trust. And it's so much easier to have that relationship when it's personal. If you don't have that personal relationship, it's super easy to say, like, oh, the intelligence community, they're so full of shit. You know, they're just trying to, say something like this. I don't agree with it. What do they know? They need to go back to school. I think I heard that one. But if I'm sitting in front of you, it's so much harder to say that. And in fact, if you like me, maybe you'll listen to me a little bit, even if you don't agree with me. And so I think that, to me, that is really what the PDB is about. It is about the personal relationship. It is about the embodiment of this relationship of trust, which is based on integrity between members of the intelligence community and the most senior people in our country who are making decisions. And to be able to have a conversation with them and to ask questions and to say, I really don't buy that. And then the person says, let me go back and ask some more questions about that. Let's see if we can pull that apart a little bit. That's really what it's all about. There is no other country in the world where these relationships exist. Not one. So I feel like we're very special and we're very, very lucky. So let me just hold questions for a second. I want to tell you just briefly about how this all works. So about 1 a.m., alarm bells, iPhones, alarm clocks go off. And these are PDB briefers. They get up around 1 a.m., they drag themselves into work, and they start going through all the material that the intelligence community produced. The PDB articles, but also, the articles that were written by the CIA and the Wire, the articles that were written by INR at State Department, the intercepts, the most important intercepts that have come in, the overhead imagery that's come in, and the people from the operations center come down and they flag things and they say, this is what's happened overnight. And then they're reading and then they're talking amongst each other, because each of these briefers come from different agencies and they work on different things. You'll have a Latin America expert, and you'll have a nuclear expert, and you'll have, someone who comes from NSA and someone who comes from NGA, and they all talk amongst each other and they have a group chat. and they have this conversation. They figure out what's going on and what's important. And then they know what's going on with their own principal. And so they not only just take this core thing called the PDB, the book, but they say, oh gosh, my guy is going to this meeting, or, the woman that I support is going on this trip. So I'm going to pull together this other stuff, and I'm going to curate this information, and I'm going to create not just the PDB core here, but I'm going to add on things that have to do with their schedule, their needs, their interests. So you get this curated thing. You have this person who's like just in your space thinking about what matters to you as a senior policymaker, and they put together something for you. It's a beautiful thing. I miss this so much. I loved it when people did this for me. And then you have the authors of these pieces come in, and the briefer gets to ask questions of those authors. So, maybe this wasn't clear, or maybe my person really cares about this and I don't know enough about the details of this, or I'm not technical. Can you please explain this to me? So they get briefed up. And then about 6 a.m., when most of us are just getting up or just hit snooze, they actually are getting in cars and they're fanning out across Washington, and they're preparing then to give briefings to, a dozen or more of these principals. And that's how it works. I mean, it's a pretty amazing machine. And I think everybody who works in these jobs feels so privileged, even though they're getting up in the middle of the night. They get so much out of it. And you think about the level of these people. These aren't all senior people who are doing this these days. And these are, people who, are in their 30s. I don't know. They still have to get up and go to get up at 1 a.m. I'm going to talk about, for me, what it takes to be a great intelligence officer. But I also think these things are about, what it takes to be successful just in the real world. And I think it applies no matter where you are in life. And the first lesson I have is know who you are. And I'll start with a little story. When I was a kid, little kid, my dad used to come into my bedroom to say goodnight, and he'd play this little game with me. And he'd bump his head against my head, and he'd say, "Who am I?" And he'd bump his head again, "Where am I?" And it'd be this game of amnesia that would just drive me completely crazy as a little kid. It's like, "Dad, you're dead," blah, 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 right? And I was sitting in the Oval Office one day at the very beginning, and that story popped into my head. Where am I? Who am I? How did I get here? This total sense of, thinking about when you were a kid and this amnesia. And I think the thing about when you're in the Oval Office like that, you're sitting across the most important person in the world. The vice president is to my left. The Secretary of State is on the couch. Secretary of Defense is sometimes there. National Security Advisor is always there. And in that moment, I think it's so important just to know who you are, right? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What's important to you? How do you behave in a situation like that? Do you pretend you're someone you're not? Do you pander? Do you tell the truth? Do you give him information that you're not sure what he's going to do with it? There were days when I would present information and I thought, it was something that I needed to tell him, and he acted completely 180 of what I expected. But, the intelligence officer doesn't get to pick. You don't get to decide what you should say or what you shouldn't say based on what you're worried about or how he might react or whether he'll be mad. And so I think really understanding and being confident about what it is you believe in and who you are. Not everybody behaved in that room in that way. And you could see that, this is the height of power. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on between those people and the president. That's not who you are. That is not your job. You are the least important person in the room, and you're there to do one thing. You're not there to talk about politics. You're not there to be part of the cabal. You're not in, you're not out. You are the briefer. And I think remembering that is really important. One day, fairly early on, I got up to go, and I thought everybody was leaving, right? And I leave the door, walk out the door, the Oval Office door, and the door shuts behind me. Not one other person left. So the head of the CIA was there, and the head of the intelligence committee was there, national security advisor, everybody stayed. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Like, I'm out, right? And I said to the secretary who was sitting there, Madeline, before she got fired, and I said, like, I should be in there. They're continuing this conversation. I didn't know. She's like, we should just go back in. I was like, I can't do that. And I was walking back across the street to the D&I's office in the Eisenhower building, and I started thinking, it's like, why is that bothering you? Like, what is it about that is upsetting? Because you're not in. Not cool kid, right? You're not like important enough to be there. And I thought, this is exactly where I should be, not in there. Because there is power to not being part of that. You're not going to be up one day and out the other, right? Not being part of that was a gift. It was good not being part of that. It allowed me to do my job. And if I worried so much about being part of the in crowd, eventually I would have found myself on the out crowd. And that was not my job. My job was to go in and to keep coming in and doing my job. So that was my first lesson. The second lesson is to put fear aside. And I think that's sometimes easier said than done. I talked in the ethics class about fear and inertia being the two most powerful and negative influences in our lives. And I really believe that. So much of what we do that we regret doing is because of fear and inertia. We can make so many mistakes because we're afraid. We don't do the right thing, or we say something because we're worried someone's going to be mad at us or not like us, or we're worried about losing our jobs, or whatever it is. Fear, it is such a powerful force. And if you're really going to do a hard job, you got to figure out how to control that. It's going to be there. I was afraid a lot. He never saw that. Most people who know me do not think that I have much fear. I worried and had fear all the time. I just figured out how to, put my big boy pants on and just do it. And once you're in that moment and you have the competency, you know what you're doing. And this is why it's so important for people, all of you who are starting out, just to practice your craft and get good at it, because it is the thing that will sustain you. And then you can put fear aside once you start talking, once you start doing the thing that you are training yourself to do. Then you can put that fear aside and just go. I won't, because we're being recorded here, tell some of the stories I can tell, but I think that one of the things that the president realized about me, or thought about me, was that I was not afraid. I started off my first day, he said something to me and I just laughed out loud. And I said, not my job. And I also violated a second rule that day, and I went around the Oval Office desk and to show him something. I realized about a year later when his assistant said that, well, no one goes around the Oval Office desk without being invited. And I said, what? I broke that rule the first day. Being comfortable about who you are. It gets back to that first thing. I know who I am. I was an intelligence officer. I was a good intelligence officer, right? I knew that because I worked at that. And I didn't think about anything else as I was giving those presentations. Everything else didn't matter. I was just trying to convey the material. And I would, he would go off and people would go off talking about stuff. And I'd be like, Intel briefing. And I'd laugh, right? I mean, it was all fun. And we laughed every day. We laughed pretty much every day. I think, it's not about taking your medicine. All right, the last thing, third lesson is to be humble. And I think that humility is a very underrated characteristic. I was telling the ethics class that, saying you were wrong is it's just this great thing to do. Just admitting it. Because the person on the other side that you're saying they were right, they will love you when you say you were right. Anyone in a relationship, say you're sorry. Say they were right. It is such a gimme. It is such a gift. And I think that this humility comes with that, right? It's like, I know I'm not right all the time. That's how I learn. I know the intelligence community is not right all the time. It's kind of documented. Iraq WMD folks, it's like, whoops, like that wasn't good. But the thing was, we learned from it, and the intelligence community got so much better because we had leaders who had courage to say, what did we do wrong there? We have got to figure out how that went wrong, and we've got to make sure we don't repeat that again. And we changed how we did things. We changed how we trained. The way I started as an intelligence analyst, nothing like how the intelligence analysts operate today. It all becomes from humility and accepting that you're not right all the time. Plus, who wants to be around someone who's right all the time? And it's so boorish. But, I used to listen to a song before I would do briefings. My predecessor, Ted, he would listen to a song. It was like, I don't know, some kind of heavy metal, like getting his, getting his adrenaline up. I listened to 21 Pilots, Don't Believe the Hype. Because that's what I thought. I mean, there were people who were saying like, oh my gosh, Beth, can you help on this briefing or that briefing, outside of the intel realm, because they thought I figured it out, right? Don't believe the hype. Because once you believe the hype, they'll smell it. And you're doomed. This is all about attitude, right? Being humble. I can't make anybody be that way. But I can tell you, you'll be more successful with humility. And if you don't have that, you can't really listen. One of my phrases is that you need to listen to be heard. It's so important to hear the other person and take that in. How many of us didn't hear what the other person said because we were thinking about what we were going to say? Ugh. We all do that. Terrible. Because that's not a conversation. Take the risk of not having the perfectly phrased thing that you're about to say. Worry less about having that perfectly phrased thing, or write it down quickly so then you can listen. Because that person, I'm telling you, if you listen and look at them like you're listening to them and hear them and respond in a way like, that's a good point. Let me think about that for a second. Actually, I think it's right here, but I disagree with this. Here's why. The intelligence community does not believe that. I can understand why you think that, because I know who was in here yesterday telling you that. But the intelligence community thinks this, and this is why. If I just went in there and lectured, that would not work. That would not work. Nobody likes that. So I think this is all just part of this attitude of humility and service and listening and giving, being okay with being wrong, right? Having a relationship of trust based on integrity. It's all related.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Horns of a Dilemma. Do not forget to read the Texas National Security Review, which you can find at tnsr.org.